Awesome. This should be a really fun panel. It's practitioner heavy, so practical, real-world advice. I'll ask the panelists to come on out, Kahnan, Tsvika, Derek, and Michele. And we'll have a fun conversation. Talk about opportunities, challenges.
Yes.
So great to have you, Michele, Tsvika, and we've got a couple more. Kahnan and
Oh, is this your chair?
I'm not sure. Maybe I'll sit
Are
here.
you sure?
And actually, yeah. Maybe that's easier. So I just look in this
All
direction. Cool. Great to have you all here. Some questions prepared, but I guess first to kick off, maybe introduce yourselves, your organizations, in terms of your maturity around cloud native, and just sort of the general observations and state of perspective in that cloud native world. So maybe starting with you, Michele.
Yeah, so I'm Michele, and I work on the DevOps team at Unity Technologies. We have the big game engine platform, and I work under the ads org. So we help developers make money, and by serving ads. So we use a lot of different cloud native technologies, Kubernetes, Helm, Terraform, which I'm really excited about. And yeah, we're definitely growing. We're hiring a lot of people. So if you're interested, come talk to me afterwards.
Awesome. Tsvika.
I'm Tsvika. I'm from Williot. What we do is battery-free Bluetooth tags, which can be used for tracking, secure tracking, and then sensing, such as temperature and motion pickup. So we're a startup. We do both the hardware and the software. We have a cloud infrastructure to handle all the data and make it available for our customers. We also use Kubernetes, multi-cloud, all kind of technologies which we talked about before.
Awesome.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kahnan Patel, and I run SaaS engineering at AppDynamics. The ones who don't know what AppDynamics does, we are an application performance monitoring company. And it's pretty interesting how we leverage cloud native. We are kind of shifted half and half in on-premises and SaaS. So everything that we built that has to work in the both side of world. And in this mix of complexity, we still use cloud native. So that's really what's interesting, how we do it.
Hey, everyone. Oh, hello. Yeah, hey, everyone. I'm Derek. I'm an SRE on the traffic team at Pinterest. On the traffic team, lately I've been working on building an Envoy-based service mesh. So that's kind of been my participation in getting Pinterest onto cloud-native technologies. Yeah.
Awesome. So you're all practitioners. You're working at a variety of really exciting technology companies, the gaming world, IoT, enterprise software, and consumer. It's fascinating to have such a rainbow of perspectives in looking at the same trend. So what was the catalyst that caused yourselves, your various organizations, to sort of look at cloud native as a trend and as a way to modernize and get leverage from your organizations? Maybe starting with Michele.
Yeah, so for us, it was really just the next step. So we actually, when I joined a little over a year ago, we were migrating from AWS to GCP. So we were already using a lot of cloud-native technologies. And at Google, we're using like GKE. We created a new common deployment pipeline for developers to use to quickly deploy, hundreds of times a day. So for us, the Catalyst was really, it was just like the next step. Something we also work on is making sure that local testing environments are as modern as they can be. So we're using Docker Compose for all of our microservices. And then also in that transition from AWS to GCP, we were able to kind of have a clean start and a clean slate. So we were able to terraform everything. So really using infrastructure as code and making sure that everything can be planned. We can see the plan, we can apply it. And kind of just going on that progression. Yeah.
So for us, we didn't have actually another option. We didn't have any legacy systems. We have to maintain the state in some central location, so it has to be the cloud. And since we do so many things, we do hardware, we do software, and the team is really small, we need to make things efficient. So it was obvious we go for everything cloud native, use what we can, and focus on our core functionality and the rest, services like Kong, API management. We take the best components and integrate into our systems.
It seemed like a green field starting from beginning, kind of the obvious choice to use the latest.
Yeah, exactly. And like Michele said, we have to automate everything. Everything needs to be automated. We cannot do things manually. Just have to orchestrate everything in order to manage such complex systems.
How about you, Connor? What are you seeing at AppDynamics?
So AppDynamics is or has been in a very unique spot given the on-premises complexity. So for us, the biggest motivation was when we broke down our monolith and moved to microservices world. Obviously, some of these cloud-native services, they have fast-tracked our development going to production, so forth, right? But I think there was a clear distinction for us that microservice foundation, which is infrastructure, which is hosting this services versus leveraging some of the cloud services as a first-class database as a service or application as a services, right? We've been very diligent about where we make our investments, leveraging clouds. So it's always been a kind of a comparison between cost and the ROI of the investments that we are getting. So I think with all of that, the great example is Aurora DB. So we've been running MySQL in our data center for many number of years and getting the best performance out of it. But when we move to cloud, just a drop-in replacement of MySQL with Aurora type of underlying architecture, which helps us scale at the next level of kind of the needs that we have. I think that was really the key decision making for us.
And Derek, it seems like with consumer internet companies, we've seen lots of distributed systems innovation from Google and from Facebook and Twitter. What's your perspective on cloud native, given that Pinterest is sort of by default already living a few years in the future?
Yeah, so Pinterest has been around for about a decade and has that classic tale of starting off as a Python monolithic application, and then we started getting a lot of traffic, and now we have to figure out how do we handle these bottlenecks, how do we isolate failures. So microservices was kind of a natural progression from there. So we started pulling out all these database access layers into their dedicated services that can be individually scaled or easy to identify, oh, this service is what's breaking. And in the continued evolution of problems that, well, as the scale started to grow and we get more traffic, we were continually looking for ways to optimize and grow our infrastructure. And an example of one of those is single tenant EC2 instances. We have all these machines that are running a single service with extra CPU and RAM that's not being used. And so we started looking for ways that we can leverage those resources. And so containers and container orchestration kind of became a natural progression from there. So it never was really that we seeked out how do we become cloud native. It's just that a lot of the technology we started looking at that could solve our current infrastructure problems were in the cloud native space. Another example is the service mesh that I've been working on building with my team. We have the classic problem of we have a service framework where we have per language client libraries, but it's a really large burden to maintain all these frameworks and keep them synchronized. And so abstracting that all out into a sidecar proxy was a really nice natural progression for us. So that's kind of our journey to adopting cloud native technology.
It seems like a lot of the conversations around cloud native are universally positive. Things are great. It helps us become more agile, save a lot of money, innovation increases. What are some of the, so in the sort of varying stages of evolution and investment around cloud native at AppDynamics and Pinterest, and how have you seen anti-patterns develop? What are things that would not be recommended to some of your peers, people in the industry, some of the gotchas? Anyone want to go for it? Maybe Michele.
Yeah, I mean, for us, there's definitely a lot. I would say the main one is actually just because of the structure at Unity, kind of each engineering team owns their own infrastructure, and they also do incident response for their own infrastructure as well. So they create the alerts, the dashboards, and everything. So it's really kind of educating developers on using new technologies and using the tools and libraries that we build. So one example that just happened a few days ago is we had our data science team, they had a Cloud SQL database, and they listed disk size as 50 gigabytes. And then, of course, the database grew beyond that size, and when they ran a Terraform plan again, the plan wanted to delete that database and then recreate it. And unfortunately for them, in production, they had auto-apply set to true. So that database was completely just deleted in production. So it's really like in those cases, just like making sure settings are correct, just making sure that developers know how to use tools like Terraform, that they understand like when they're deploying a microservice, the different permissions that like a service account needs to actually deploy a service, that they understand like what a node pool is, like, just all those basic things, especially when, you hand over ownership to them.
Interesting. So it seems that you described kind of a like ops or DevOps to core development transition or like communication bridge. Has that been the source of lots of like pain, tension?
I think like our developers are at like a fantastic caliber because they understand DevOps and development work.
Oh, interesting.
So I think like it's great for them professionally and also for the company as a whole, because you don't just have one small team of DevOps engineers who are like chugging away and like fixing like little mistakes. It's like we're educating everyone on the team to like own their own infra and like build cool stuff.
Cool. How about you guys?
For us, I think a good example of Antipattern was, since we wanted to really focus on the core business and not handle automation or minimize our DevOps, so we said let's go for serverless.
Serverless.
Yeah, full-blown serverless. Use the functions. Write just the core components and. But since in our use case cost is so important, it's not the really amount of data, but the amount of events is really, really large. So we eventually understood that serverless is not the right solution for us. We talked with the AWS guys, and apparently it costs you about 4 times on-demand instances. So what we understood that is if we go cloud, okay, we can go cloud, but go the other way, not to the serverless, but back to the machines, back to the physical servers, and even more, go to the spot instances to reduce cost as much as we can. So we reversed, went all Kubernetes, running on spot instances, managed by, we use Spotinst to manage that. And this was our journey.
Interesting. I guess as an IoT platform company, you sort of view cloud native differently because of a lot of the edge processing and like disconnected device sort of environment. So when you say serverless, can you elaborate on serverless in the context of like IoT? Are there nuances there that kind of cause you to look at Antipatterns maybe a little differently?
So regarding serverless, it was clear for us that we're gonna use cloud functions like or Google Cloud Functions or AWS Lambda, something like that, and not host the serverless infrastructure ourselves. And we went that way, but we understood that if we looking on cost, this is not the right solution for, I don't want to say IoT in general, because if I look on the IoT as a spectrum, so we are on the far edge of ultra-thin devices, energy harvesting devices, and it's very different use case from the traditional battery-powered or powered IoT devices. So I don't want to generalize on the entire IoT ecosystem, but for us, going for serverless probably was not the right case.
Interesting.
Yeah, very interesting. I was kind of like thinking about what you just said. For AppDynamics, obviously, or rather, let me take a step back. I think the cost is the biggest focus point for us. But the cost comes in the terms of many shapes and forms. Like the cost could be just the development cost of building two different solutions for on-premises and SaaS. And SaaS using some of this cloud-native services will make your operational burden, and it will get up and running pretty quickly. But then you have a cost of maintaining two different implementations. So I don't know how productive your engineering teams, your developers are going with that model. But I think the more so importantly, I have seen this pattern both in AppDynamics and outside, talking to some of the other peers and colleagues. When you choose this point-in-time solutions to solve a very specific problems using the cloud services, just like a database as a service, right? In future, when the use cases changes or your platform evolves, you end up in a state where this cloud-native service does not solve all of your problems, and that also kind of like reminds me the conversation I was just having with Joseph, that there's this big ecosystem of open source companies, right, who does a very nuanced innovations, which not necessarily every single cloud service flagship solutions will solve for everyone, right? So I think you end up duplicating this data. Once you do a point-in-time solution, then you find another service which fits some slight variation of that use case. So I think in terms of cost, duplicating this data across many cloud-native services, it end up being a lot more costly for us to kind of maintain and operate compared to like finding a right solution from the open source world and hosting on cloud.
Very interesting. This reminds me of Preeti's comment, Preeti of HashiCorp. The world is heterogeneous. You go into an enterprise like Cisco or AppDynamics, and there's sort of 5 of everything. So I guess would the conclusion from your like anti-pattern be to centralize on one standard service, or how would you sort of think through
So
that?
I think a lot of this enterprise-y use cases or solutions that we are building for our customers, right? It's a lot different from a cookie cutter solution on the cloud native services out there, right? So I think also the discovery cycles of figuring out what we are building in terms of features, it's a lot longer, right? So I don't know if it makes sense to just do this point in time solutions, and if you're a Netflix, then we can just go through the trends and solve that one problem, and tomorrow just use some other cloud service to kind of completely pivot our solution, right? But that not necessarily happens in the enterprise world that much, right? When you have so much complexity. So I think making the conscious decision of what's a right solution for you, and whether you're hosting that solution or using the cloud native solution, that should be the real comparison, not just the operational efficiency and quickly up and running in production.
Right tool for the right job.
Yep.
Derek?
Yeah, so I feel like the Pinterest infrastructure story is often one of many migrations all the time. A couple years ago, it was migrating everything to Docker containers. Now it's migrating everything to Kubernetes, or migrating things into Service Mesh, or Python 2 to Python 3, or Ubuntu versions. The list goes on. And I think one thing that's really important is to understand that when you change things, things may break, and accepting that level of risk and being prepared to handle these incidents is imperative to any type of migration. So I think that's the first lesson I'd say, is always be prepared for things to break. Failures happen. The second point that I had is that, oh man, I'm blanking on it.
Many migrations constantly.
Yeah, many migrations. Shoot, I blanked on the second thing I had to say. Sorry about that.
No, that's okay. I mean, it's interesting that you're modernizing, but you're also viewed as a modern technology company, and you have to like respond to what developers are interested in, whether it's Docker or serverless or Kubernetes.
Yeah, which actually, thank you. You reminded me of my second point was, thank you, which is that when you have a very large distributed system, chances are that your infrastructure team alone cannot do all the work themselves. So kind of as Michele was saying, it's imperative that you give your developers the tools to do the work themselves for their own services, and also provide those teams with incentives. Why should I move to Kubernetes? Well, here's a bunch of reasons why. So having those reasons, so that second lesson I'd say is don't move to things because they're shiny. Move to things because you have a really good technical story as to why it makes the lives of your developers better.
Rationale, enablement for developers.
Yeah.
Very cool. So I did have a couple of questions related to what we've been talking about. We've actually covered quite a lot of ground, and we have another 12 minutes. So maybe you can sort of improvise the rest related to everything we've been talking about. So I guess maybe one question overall, quick question for the whole panel. Are any of you using Kong today?
We are not at Unity, as far as I know. In the ad sector, we aren't.
Yeah, AppDynamics is a big user of Kong. We just put as a ad service as a traditional gateway in front of all of our applications in SaaS. Yeah, I think if I can elaborate a little bit. So the advantage with Kong for us is it's an open source. That's first, and we are not locked into one of the implementation which is tied up to the vendor, and we are planning to ship the same ad service that we are building in SaaS, exactly identical way packaged in on-prem, right? So for us, we don't want to go through this heavy licensing software version which cannot be customized and handle two different use cases of SaaS and on-prem, as well as when we ship things on-prem, the license preclude us from kind of doing some of the use cases that we want to handle, right? And we cannot really pass down this cost on our customers, obviously, right? So in that way, I think it became that perfect solution, right? In like the first few days that we need something which has the enterprise support in production. There is somebody who provides that insurance policy for us for all the scale in SaaS. But then at the same time, we should be able to package this as a micro workload on premises for our customers.
That makes me think of a question like open source, just like abstractly itself, kind of enables levels of infrastructure neutrality, infrastructure portability that previously proprietary technology stacks did not provide. Have you also, anyone else, have you seen sort of open source as a paradigm be sort of fundamental to innovating on the infrastructure side and kind of providing freedom of choice and flexibility for your developers, your customers?
I think I want to add one more point, that whether you are on-premises or managed service or SaaS, I think if you're just purely SaaS as a consumer company or just a SaaS workload, still the complexity of different public cloud provider itself, that's a good enough reason to have this kind of like cloud neutrality, right? So I don't think anybody, or at least our own customers, like enterprise customers that we go and talk to, I don't think anybody is married to one cloud nowadays, right? So.
In the same way maybe that no one is just investing on one open source technology, they use many cloud providers, they use many. How have you all seen open source be crucial in looking at cloud native and kind of evaluating all the technology, all the choices? I think there's this cloud native like map of 8,000 technologies, lots of choices out there. How are you navigating the choices?
I think for us it was a strategic decision. So there's another dimension. There's the open source dimension who can give you the ability to go cloud agnostic. But we separated it into compute layer and the data layer. And when you decide on the strategy, you really need to understand where are you going to be totally cloud agnostic, and when are you going to marry or commit to some cloud. So our decision was to use open source, use Kubernetes for our compute layer, which is completely cloud agnostic. It can run anywhere.
Yeah.
But on the data layers, we decided that we use the cloud-provided databases. And when we need to move to another cloud or to support more clouds, so just build the adapters for those data layers, because the complexity and burden of managing the data layers is much, much more complex than managing the compute layers. So this is the directions that we choose to go.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, my favorite part is just being able to open a GitHub issue. So like basically our philosophy is to just POC everything. So basically when choosing between like Envoy or Linkerd or Istio, right, we do a POC with like a small microservice, and then we see like, does this actually meet our needs? We'll like open a GitHub issue if there's a problem or if we can't figure something out. And then usually like if the maintainers or community can like answer, then that's like a huge thumbs up for us, because it just gives us you know, the help that we need and the support that we need to actually like use their product at a massive scale at Unity. So yeah, I'm definitely a big proponent of open source, especially when it comes to stuff like, you know, we have like little problems like gRPC load balancing. Like that's not like a native Kubernetes thing because it uses HTTP too. So like finding like a solution, whether it's like client pooling or like using Istio or Envoy, like those are things that we definitely POC and then, you know, try to standardize on at the company. I'm sure you guys also have a lot to say about open source.
How do you see that at Pinterest? How important is open source at Pinterest, a big, huge consumer internet company?
Yeah, we definitely try to stick to open source as much as possible, partially because it's just so great to be part of a community that is trying to solve similar problems that you can talk with and say, hey, this is my solution, what does yours look like? When my team was first looking to replace our Ingress HTTP router, we were looking at a couple different options. One of them was build our own load balancer, and then the other one we were looking at was Envoy. And so we kind of did a feature-by-feature comparison, and Envoy provided a lot out of the box that we did not have to build. So that's the option we went. But what we didn't know at the time was how wonderful of a community it is that we could open an issue and get a lot of great feedback from the maintainers on, oh, this is something that we could fix. Or maybe if you want to provide a pull request, we're happy to review it and get it accepted. Likewise, we have quite a few engineers at Pinterest contributing to the Kubernetes ecosystem. So kind of being in this sort of family of people trying to solve same technology problems has been extremely beneficial for Pinterest, and we try to leverage that as much as we can.
Very cool. One final question, maybe 1 to 2 minutes for each of you. What advice would you give an organization just today, regardless of the size, looking at going down this cloud native path and whatever cloud native means?
That's a great question. So for me, I would just say POC everything. I think as you mentioned as well, like find the tool, like the right tool for the job. So don't just go for the shiniest thing because it probably won't meet your needs. And if it is super new as well, like kind of be cautious. So we've used like some Google Cloud APIs that were in alpha stage, and then they completely change when they move to beta, right? So like using those things in production is really scary at scale. So definitely like just be cautious, like work with the provider or the open source community and like figure out what will actually like meet your needs, and then educate your developers so that they can like manage some of the infra as well.
Awesome.
From my point of view, I would look at two opposing forces. One is the cost, operational cost, and the second one is maintenance. And there's a sweet spot between them, which is fit to each organization. So if you go to one edge, you lose in the other, and you really need to understand what you need as an organization, what is your true pain point, and then pick the right sweet spot, because there are so many cloud solutions out there, and you need to choose the right one for you, and there's no silver bullet. You need to adjust to your needs.
Makes sense. Cool.
Yeah, I think I agree with both Michele and Tsvika said. I think doing your due diligence up front, it's very important. Whether you're a startup who is rapidly growing and end up being in this growth world where it's very hard to replace things and you have to kind of live by the choices you made. So be cautious with that. Or you can be enterprise who needs a great partner in the journey of what you're building and what you're supporting. And I don't think being in cloud native, you'll be able to do those customizations, or you'll have that great partner who's willing to kind of support the alteration to the services that you made, right? Or the way you are using. So I think that's where this ecosystem of open source with the enterprise support is kind of the trend that we see all around, right? That you have a great partner always available whenever you need help, and you can customize this open source world how you see fit.
Dirk?
It's difficult to not repeat anything that was already said, but coming from a different angle, all these technologies in this cloud-native space are moving incredibly fast. There's a lot of development going on. So if you do decide to use these technologies, I would urge you to try to stay up to date because things are changing all the time and adapting all the time. And along with that, you all have the ability to influence the direction of these projects. If you just get involved in the community, open up issues, and talk to the developers in the community, and there's something that's missing that you want, chances are there are other people who also want that and will help you accomplish that and help that project satisfy your solution. So everything's changing really quickly, and we all have the ability to have an impact on how everything
That's awesome. Let's give a round of applause to our amazing panelists for all this wisdom. Thanks, guys.